Welcome. Step into the lab. On this podcast, we will be discussing the practices, research, science, and technology surrounding alternative medicine, where listeners will gain valuable insight and information with every episode. Just as a reminder, the Mind or a Lab podcast is for educational and informational purposes solely. All subjects on this podcast should not be construed as medical or legal advice. You should always seek out help from a professional provider. Thank you. Hi, welcome. I am your host, Dorian Gutierrez of the Mind or a Lab podcast. I'm sitting today with Dr. Riley Kirk, the creator of Bioactive podcast and Cannabis. She is an educator in the cannabis field, and she is a researcher and scientist. How are we doing today, Riley?
I'm doing amazing today. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you for being here. Just a huge fan of your work and everything that you're pushing forward on all of your social media accounts. I think that Ewan is her name. Do I pronounce it correctly? Miyabi?
Yes, correct. Miyabi. Dr. Miyabi Shields.
Yeah. Dr. Miyabi. Yeah, she's also really cool. I've been looking at the posts that she's been creating as well, and the work that you guys are doing together is phenomenal. I think that there needs to be more people that move forward and create action instead of just speaking about it. So thank you.
Yeah, definitely. And it's a pleasure to work with Miyabi. And we created a nonprofit together to hopefully help people get more involved and help them, with that avenue or whatever avenue they want, get involved in change, whether it's with cannabis or whatever you're passionate about. Your voice does matter, and you can make change.
Love that. So just to get into it, can you tell the audience about where you're from and where did you grow up?
Absolutely. So I am from New England. So I currently live in New Hampshire, in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, kind of in the middle of nowhere, but I love that. I'm an active hunter,
Mhm.
trapper, fisher, gardener, all of the things. So I really love being out here in the wild. And I'm originally from Standish, Maine. So originally from Maine, and then I've kind of worked my way down the coast as I've gotten an education and work experience. I've worked in Mass, Rhode Island, and yeah, settled down here in New Hampshire, and I love it here.
Awesome. I've never actually been to the Northeast. So I was born in the Midwest, and then I grew up in Las Vegas, and I've just been all along the West Coast. And then I just came back from Florida. I was living there for a little bit on a project.
Oh,
But yeah,
cool.
the Northeast, yeah, I definitely need to come and check that out.
Yeah, if you ever do, hit me up. We can hang out, and at the very least, I can also give you some spots to hang out in pretty much every state around here.
Awesome. So, what college did you go to, and what did you study?
Yeah, I went to the University of New Hampshire, which is on the coast of New Hampshire here. I studied biomedical science. I originally went to school for pre-vet, like veterinary sciences.
Yeah.
And that was just because I loved animals. I was like, oh, I love cats. I should be a vet, right? So then after
Mhm.
I started really learning about everything vets do, I decided I didn't want to
Yeah.
be a vet anymore. So I switched to pre-med. And then
Mhm.
even like I really love the science part of pre-med, like learning about the different systems in the body, the anatomy, the physiology. But I quickly realized that I didn't want to be pre-med either, especially, hospitals kind of scared me. So
Yeah.
I kind of decided against that. But that was, yeah, that at that time when I graduated undergraduate, I had no idea what I wanted to be when I grew up. So like right after undergrad, I immediately took a job in the biotech industry, and that
Mhm.
was like so valuable for learning lab skills and learning about like kind of the other side of science of really what's going on behind the scenes and doing all these assays, analyzing the data, creating these reports. I really enjoyed that experience too.
That's awesome. So prior to getting into college, did you have a scientific curiosity, or was it more inspired once you started going down these tracks of possible career?
Yeah, when I was younger, I never thought about being a scientist, ever.
Mm,
I was very curious about everything, and I was very addicted to nature. So in that sense,
mhm,
kinda looking back, I guess I did have a curiosity of biology, whether it's plants or animals. I've always kind of been, infatuated with that, but as far as, like, laboratory work and meeting scientists and even knowing what scientists did, I really had no interest until probably beginning of college when I started to take science courses and I had lab classes and I started to understand what science was and
mhm.
how interesting it really can be.
Yeah, I think, and I was just speaking with a nurse 2 days ago about when you're in the thick of it in undergrad, how you start to appreciate the labs that you're in, but you don't fully appreciate them until you're out of college because you're so focused on grades and making sure that you're getting everything right to a T so that you could pass that course or that lab, right? But yeah, just having like a further push and understanding of it once you get out and you're able to apply those principles, that's when the fun things start happening.
Yeah, definitely. And lab classes, you're so right that looking back, we had so many resources. We had an educator in front of us, like showing us what to do. We had all the reagents
Yeah.
in the world that we'd ever need. Like everything was like kind of perfect. But especially when you're in the heart of it in lab classes. I remember one semester, I think I had like three different courses that had labs associated with them. So it was just kind of stressful, like making sure you're
Okay.
prepared and you have your pre-lab done and then you're there, you might have a lab report from the week before and it's almost like you're too stressed to like even retain the knowledge at that point. You're just like trying to get everything done. And I mean, I guess a lot of people are still living in that way of just like always rushing and not being able to kind of stop and understand how special of a moment that you're in. But yeah, looking back, and even like the friends you meet in labs, I'm still friends with some of my old lab mates, which is kind of cool looking back.
Yeah, I I remember one lab that I was taking, I think it was Bio 2, and they had us dissecting pig cadavers, like small baby pig cadavers. And I remember taking the time to get through that entire allotted time to open up the skull of the pig and like expose the brain, and I got it fully intact. And like all my other lab mates, they all left because they're like, oh, they got other things to study for. We gotta complete this report. Like, why am I gonna waste my time on doing something that I'm not gonna be able to keep? But to me, it was just like we have this privilege right now to be able to explore all of the biological concepts that are put before us. So, um, just being able to recognize that and appreciate it in that moment. And I'm so focused on um, how you can change your neural wiring through compounds and just through learning. That it was fascinating to see like the actual tangible example of what is um, basically our supercomputer that is making us operational on a day-to-day like function.
Oh, absolutely. And also, what a great way to show respect for that animal, too, rather than kind of just like going through the motions, checking the box, rushing, and maybe not even finishing whatever you're doing. Like, that animal, that cadaver it's dead, it's deceased at that point, but that body can either be used as an educational tool to help, shape your
Mhm.
mind into something that learns something from that experience, or it's just, a dead body that just kind of died so somebody would throw it away in a different trash can. So, cheers to you for that, for sure.
Thank you. Yeah, there's just that scientific curiosity of like wanting to understand. So leaning into the next question is when you did get into the biotech world, did this inspire you to want to go into education next, or was it a segue to get into cannabis research?
Yeah, so even in biotech, I still had no idea what I wanted to do. All I knew was I didn't want to keep doing what I was doing. Um,
Mhm.
the the lab work was great, like as far as learning those lab skills. But after you do the same thing for 6 months, you kind of like I wanted to keep learning. I wanted to keep,
Mhm.
refining skills or learning about different systems, learning about different drugs. And the company I worked at was a CRO, so it was a contract research organization. So like
Okay.
everything that I was really doing and participating in the lab was really just somebody else's project that they were designing and that they needed data for, right? That was my job, to get
Right.
data. And I did that. That was great. But I never knew the full story of, did that drug work? Did these patients live? I never got any answers other than statistical relevance, which is,
Mhm.
good for a short time. But, I wanted to do more with that. And what what I was always kind of just like enamored with was, again, back to nature, like whether it was in high school or college. I've always been foraging like outside kind of all the time, collecting natural products, collecting plants, collecting fungi. But throughout all of this experience, like I would identify a fungus and, like maybe do a quick Google search or something, or same thing with a plant. And every time, like these scientific articles would come up, and I would try reading them and I would
Mhm.
try learning about these different medicinal plants and what they're used for in herbalism and in like current modern medicine. And I could
Mhm.
not read the papers. Like I did not understand what the language was, what anyone was saying in these papers. And that's really at that point, like I knew I loved medicinal plants. I was kind of obsessed with them. I read about them all the time, but I was just missing this huge piece of like, how does this fit into the context of science and medicine? And then actually, while I was starting to get bored at my job, I started to research like jobs within this field of like medicinal plants and research and science. And I came across a
Yeah.
word I had never heard before. And the word is pharmacognosy, which really breaks
Okay.
down into like the knowledge of pharma, because pharmacognosy was the first realm of pharmaceutical sciences to ever exist. And it's the study of nature as medicine. Because when, pharmaceutical sciences first came about, all we had on this earth was natural products to use. Kind of like apothecaries and herbal medicine. That's all we had for medicine. So that was the first branch of pharmaceutical sciences. And I learned that this is still a very active branch of pharmaceutical sciences, that you can go to school to learn about where drugs come from as far as like natural sources of medicine, because 60% of
Mhm.
pharmaceutical drugs come from nature. They're often changed to be more bioavailable or stronger or more permeable, whatever it is, but they originate from nature because nature is the best organic chemist in the world. So, after I learned about this field of science, I immediately became obsessed, derailed my entire life. I was like, I'm doing that absolutely 100%, no question about it. And
Yeah.
I was telling a couple of my coworkers that I was friends with and kind of trusted at the time. I was like, I just found out about, like, I want to go into a grad program. I want to study this. I want to do this forever. And I was telling one of them, and she goes, "Oh, um, my daughter's boyfriend is in a pharmacognosy program at the University of Rhode Island." And I was like, "What? Like, I can't believe you know this word. Like, this is amazing." So she linked me up with him to meet up, and I drove to Rhode Island. I spoke with him. I spoke to the other graduate students, and I met with a couple professors there. And one of the ones that I met with was Dr. Matthew Burton, who ended up being now a very good friend of mine and my mentor.
Mhm.
And I ended up joining his lab, and that's how I got into that realm of research in grad school, and the rest is history. I have researched phytoplankton, cyanobacteria, diatoms, medicinal plants, fungi, so many different cool natural products. And my time at URI was just a really positive experience in the research world.
Wow, what an incredible journey that you went down on. I think, I shared similar events in my life where, so growing up in the Midwest, I actually, a lot of people don't know this, but I'm part of a Native American tribe, and my family originates out of Macy, Nebraska, on my mom's side, and my grandma had a 2 acre land plot that was connected to a forest in the back. So, in the countryside on the reservation, you can do whatever you want. And I would go forage for mushrooms with her at times that were edible. And I
Cool.
would get lost in the forest by myself, which never went well with my mom around because she was always scared of where the fuck is Dorian at? And I'm
Fair
just like
enough.
out I'm just out in the woods doing my own thing, right? So I've always gravitated towards nature as well. And then moving to Vegas kind of like stunted all of that because it's the desert, and I was kind of pissed off that I got taken out of like a seasonal place of growing up. But having that time to connect with nature helped me establish those roots that, okay, biology, botany, these are things that interest me. And I think at some level, all of us have that innately embedded into us. We've been so consumed by technology and society growing rapidly that we forget about our roots. Or some people don't even get born or privileged to see the natural world like we have experienced it. So yeah, like going into pre-med and wanting to learn more and more about where we come from, how we started, how we're interacting with the external world, etc. Also opened up my eyes to all of that. So, just it's cool that there are people uh, who are still being exposed to the natural world, and that's what piques their curiosity, and then they go into deeper and deeper rabbit holes down with scientific research. So it's really cool to hear that backstory.
Cool. Yeah, thanks. And I agree, we are privileged to have this access to nature and grow up in families that also appreciate nature and have access. So, I feel incredibly fortunate to have that in my life, and I agree, it's part of human curiosity to want to explore nature. And that's part of what really irks me about not having the right to home grow in every single state in the United States. I think it can help restore that connection with nature. But at the end of the day, we are nature. We are a natural entity. And no lawmaker should have the right to separate us from other nature. Like, we should have access to all natural products if we want to cultivate them. If we need to have some sort of limit or some whatever the politicians say, maybe, but at the very least, we should all have access to a few plants to be able to cultivate that medicine and build that connection with nature. I won't get too radical any well, maybe I will later on, but my belief for the need for home grow is like top, 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 top. I think every state, we in every state federally, we should have access to that.
So, hot topic. How did you get into cannabis then?
Yeah, so I got into cannabis. Well, I'll start by saying I have been a like daily cannabis consumer since I was 14 years old. So throughout this whole journey I'm talking about, cannabis has always been a part of it, but I never even considered that as a path for me forward, the cannabis
Mm,
industry.
yeah.
It was just kind of my medicine. It was just part of my life. I never kind of thought it would be an entire career. Looking back, that's kind of funny because like my entire personality is like a stoner for so long. But anyway, so I got into cannabis actually in graduate school. Again, I've always really been an open cannabis consumer and I never try to hide it. It's kind of just my
Mhm.
personality. So, a lot of times, like if we were talking about new research in Journal Club and it had to do with cannabis, everyone would be like, oh, like Riley, you must know all about this. And I did. I stayed on top of cannabis research all through graduate school. And I started to really research the hemp plant towards the end of grad school. And mind you, we still couldn't research type 1 THC dominant cannabis. So this is again CBD dominant cannabis that I was studying in grad
Mhm.
school. And I was studying CBD topical formulations and the permeability of CBD through the skin with different formulations. Because oftentimes you see these cannabis products, whether it has CBD in it, THC in it, and we kind of just like slap it into a formulation and then we release it onto the market and it might smell good and it might be endorsed by a celebrity. But can we directly compare how well these different formulations are working for how far they can penetrate into the skin and therefore how well that topical can work for whatever ailment you're using it
Mhm.
for? So I was studying CBD topical formulations for a couple of years, published some papers on that. But then I started to be the teacher's assistant for the cannabis program that URI was initiating towards the end of my grad school career. So I started to be the TA. I would be making these educational videos for the courses, kind of talking about cannabis chemistry, cannabis pharmacology, and these are just like on Brightspace or whatever the online portal was. But through making these videos, I really started to refine my communication skills with talking about cannabis and the science of cannabis and making it approachable and making it relatable to people who use cannabis, because anybody who's in that course was passionate about cannabis for some reason enough to sign up for a college course to take it, right? So I was really doing these breakdown videos of all the science. And then the pandemic hit, and I wasn't making these videos anymore because I wasn't in the lab anymore. But
Yeah.
TikTok started to be this really cool app that everyone was using. And I was bored for like the first time in my life. So I was like, I'm going to make a TikTok video and I'm going to talk about cannabis chemistry and cannabis pharmacology. So I make a couple videos and those just like blow up. They get like a million views, however many billion people saw it, and this account just started to grow, and people started to suggest different videos to watch and different things, whatever. So I just kept making videos on TikTok about cannabis, and
Mhm.
at this point, I'm also like I was writing my dissertation, about to finish. And then actually, my first job out after graduate school was working for a cannabis company, um, studying cannabis smoke research. And I got that job from my TikTok videos because
Wow.
Miyabi, who was working at that company, saw my videos and was like, "We need to hire this girl. She's really cool." And then I met up with them and I got the job. And then I started to like really be in the industry and start to study cannabis and hemp and understand a little more about the science and the consumer experience. And that's how I originally got into that was kind of a long story, but that's how I got into the industry.
No, that's
TikTok.
so fucking cool. Because I mean, most people's stories of how they got into cannabis usually are unique. Like it is a long-winded journey of like all these experiences that you're culminating to get to that point where it's like, oh shit, this has been in front of my face all along. It's like, how did I not see this? But it's just really connecting with the people that are actually passionate and want to continue doing good work, and that's why you were found, because someone else saw the same level of spark and interest that you were providing that they already had. So that's really cool that you were able to get picked up by all your educational videos, and that's how you met Miyabi, and you guys are good friends, right?
Yeah, that's how we met up. We met up in Rhode Island because I was at URI at the time, and they were living in Boston. And we met up, and we thought we were going to talk about like science and cannabis and all the relevant things, but we essentially just talked about like all the unknowns of the universe and like how a lot of scientists just don't understand the practicality of research and how we need to publish more things that are relevant to people. And we just were spiraling, and it's like, wow, this is really refreshing to talk to someone else with like the same background but see all these like massive gaps and these in these industries, and just like, why aren't we doing this? This is such the obvious thing to focus on, but that might not be where the grant funding is, or that might not be how a tenure track professor needs to perform and in order to excel in academia. So I think both of us had a lot of similar frustrations with some traditional systems, and we still have those frustrations, but we feel like we're making legitimate change, and we need everyone to do their role, and our role was just not within that system, but we collaborate with people in those systems. So hopefully we can all work together to make the change that we're hoping to see.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree with that. And I think just with getting people interested in the stories that people can bring forth about how they got into the industry. I know I had a lot of people on Instagram because I'm part of a raving community, and they would. And so at the first lab that I worked at, I would post videos of dancing inside the lab, away from the equipment, obviously, and I'd be in like a white coat and whatnot, and so everyone was like, "Oh, like how did you get into doing lab work with cannabis and you're dancing inside the lab?" And I'm just like, it's it's a long story, but it's just like go into a STEM field, get some sort of skill that applies to a laboratory setting, and just apply yourself, because the cannabis industry needs more people who are out of the box thinkers. Like, yes, it's getting more and more standardized. However, there still is more innovation that's needed, and it's not just scientists that are needed. It's like basically everyone is it's just wide open for people to get involved in some way.
Absolutely. And I feel like our industry is very creative, especially the scientists. And I love just talking to other scientists who are cannabis consumers and scientists, because it really does make you think differently. I mean, you think of some really crazy theories, and you can bounce it off of other scientists, and when you're together you can just like a brainstorming sesh when you're seshing is so fun. And it's such a like it's so frowned upon in so many like scientific entities, fields, but with in the cannabis industry, it's so often just kind of incorporated into that brainstorming. And I love that. I really I've solved more problems by smoking a joint and talking with other scientists than I think, doing any sort of like long-winded research on the internet. It's really amazing how it does expand our minds and make us think more creative. And of course, a lot of cannabis consumers in the industry are also artists too, which I notice all the time when I'm talking to other stoner scientists, whether it's painting or whether it's pottery, whatever it is. A lot of people like to work with their hands in other ways, and I think that also adds to our kind of creative capacity.
Yeah, absolutely. So with the amount of research that you've done, can you break down some of the most interesting facts that the audience can take away from the work that you're doing right now?
Yeah, definitely. So I'll kind of say a couple things from like past research and current research. So some past research, most CBD topicals are not making it to anywhere in your skin of value. And if you do want to use a CBD topical that works well, you can also just use a topical at home and add a CBD product directly to it, or a THC product directly to it, and it will work just as well as the ones on the market, and it's much cheaper. But that's just a little fun fact. Some of the coolest things as far as the research I've done with smoke studies and cannabis smoke
Hmm.
is, I think, consumers should definitely know that if you prefer smoking as your consumption method, it's likely because the chemistry is unique when you're smoking. The really high temperatures that you use during the smoking process help facilitate some chemical changes in the actual like flower and in your bud. And the molecules entering your body are different than the molecules entering your body with some other consumption methods, whether it's a tincture or a gummy or some other form of consumption. So, like for instance, CBD will like when smoked, break down into CBE, CBC, CBL, like so many different cannabinoids. CBD alone will break down into about 14 to 25 different molecules, depending on temperature. And that's the same thing for every single molecule in that starting material. We don't have that all quantified, like every single change from every single starting molecule, but it
Hmm.
is definitely expansive and definitely helps explain why smoking feels different than other consumption methods. Um, I did a really cool study with raw rolling papers. I think this
Hmm.
was last year, and they have not published it yet, so I can't like attach it in the show notes, but I can talk about it. And it was a study on the production of CBN or cannabinol, and the thought was if you have a fatter joint that you would be producing more CBN compared to a smaller joint, like during the smoking process. And actually,
Hmm.
we found out that the size of the joint doesn't matter as much as the geometry of the joint. And what I mean by that is if your joint is kind of like, think of a cylinder where neither side really tapers down, you're going to have
Hmm.
less conversions compared to a joint that has a really small end and a really fat end. And that's going to convert faster from THC to CBN. So I thought that was a fun little study. Some of our
Yeah,
first, isn't that
that's
funny?
a
Like that was
it
a
is,
that
yeah.
was kind of a unexpected finding in that experiment, but also Raw is just such a fun company to work with on kind of these more like mythbuster type experiments.
Yeah, I think that's like more of a physics problem that someone needs to solve there.
Right? Yeah, and I'm not a physicist, so if anybody wants to help tackle that. Some of the cooler research we're now doing at a like population-wide level, and
Hmm.
this is research through our newly formed nonprofit called the Network of Applied Pharmacognosy. But what we did
Hmm.
is we designed a research study to ask questions that have never really been asked and to also understand the daily use patterns of people who use cannabis. So, are people using once a day? Are they using 5 times a day? Are they using 0 times a day? We weren't really
Hmm.
sure because we've never really had a survey that tracked people's consumption over time and understood what their use patterns are like. So in this first study, we have about 6,000 people that initially took part in it. And we found
Hmm.
some really interesting data. About half of the people were neurodivergent, and about half the people were also LGBTQ that took the survey. And those numbers are definitely higher because a lot of the people were found through social media. But what
Hmm.
we're finding is, a lot of people are dosing up to 5 times a day. The majority of people are dosing themselves before noon every single day. And also, about 60% of people consume cannabis and drive. Some of these statistics might be a little scary to people, right? Because they're like, oh my God,
Yeah.
60% of people are consuming cannabis and driving. But it's also like we need to think about this in context of these people are multiple times a day cannabis consumers. Their tolerance is very high and they require this
Hmm.
medicine to essentially feel normal. So, if we want people to be able to work jobs and go grocery shopping, we really need to look at, the laws we're making and the perceived danger kind of in the context of this as a medicine. We allow people to take many different psychopharmaceutical drugs without setting any threshold for what the other people are allowed to drive with or operate machinery or whatever it is. And I think our goal for a survey like this is to use science and data as advocacy to really look into the real numbers that we're seeing, not just like people lying on surveys. This was a anonymous survey, but it's also like we were releasing this. Myself and Dr. Shields were releasing this survey, and we've really built trust through our community where people, like I say all the time online that I'm a daily cannabis user. I have videos of me smoking joints online. We've built this community of trust where people know that we're not going to misrepresent this data and that they can be honest in this survey, because we're really doing this for our community. And I think that's kind of where the power of the survey lies, because these numbers aren't scary when you think about it. I mean, you're a cannabis consumer and you understand our community. A lot of people with these high tolerances are able to operate just as any other normal person would, whether it's when they're using cannabis, and they actually operate significantly worse in life when they don't have cannabis. So whether it's allowing people to consume higher amounts, I don't know, when they're driving. I'm not saying you should be able to smoke everything you want when you're driving, but using
Mhm.
these numbers to really understand this is what people are actually doing. How can we understand this from a population wide scale? And how can we use this initial data to set up future studies, biochemical studies, and also just like population based studies to understand more about this data, more about these people, and how we can help these people instead of stigmatize these people and further put them into a box and make them feel like they aren't part of society.
I really like how you touch on the other pharmaceutical grade substances that people are taking on a day-to-day basis, not including the amount of people that are functioning alcoholics. I mean, yeah, the statistics that you're releasing might be shocking to some people, but it's like, I mean, I live in Las Vegas. I'm back home now, and I'm just like, I already know a ton of functioning alcoholics that are constantly working and doing the things that they're already doing and driving. So it's just like, yeah, sure, these could be shocking statistics for people to say, like, oh, yeah, they're under the influence of smoking, but you're right. They are using this through a medicinal purpose so that they can be functional and that they can live their life comfortably, just like other people who are, could be abusing certain substances as well. So I'm glad that you're able to make that distinction and point that out because it is important to take note of. Yes, since this is still federally illegal, you can make that point of, well, this might be dangerous, but it's like, what's legal currently that could still be just as detrimental and even more dangerous?
Right. And like the data with cannabis and driving, I don't know if you've read any of the papers, but it's really not substantial. And in states that have legalized cannabis, we don't see an uptick in the amount of motor vehicle accidents. We don't see that type of correlation. And I think when a lot of people think of like cannabis and driving, they're thinking of like that scene with Cheech and Chong, like, driving and smoking a massive joint. And I think we need to kind of like reconceptualize what we think of as like a stoner, a cannabis consumer. It's not always that. It might be just somebody, taking a hit of a bong before they go to the grocery store because maybe they have severe anxiety or maybe they have something else going on. Like that is a very normal way to use cannabis, in my opinion. And I still think that's very safe. Now, also saying like, routine cannabis consumers can predict and like read their high very well.
Mhm.
They will know if one hit from a bowl is an appropriate amount to use or not. And unfortunately, like that discretion is the part that you need to write into the law. And we always want to set a specific threshold like we do with alcohol, right? The 0.08%. Um,
Mhm.
and we try to do that with cannabis, but we have no data for what that number should be because it's not a linear correlation like it is with alcohol, and we can't expect that linear nature with cannabis. So states are trying to implement this like 2 nanograms per mil, but some people might have significantly more than that in their system but not feel high at all, and then somebody might have that in their system and they do feel high. So, we need a way that's not based in stigma and based in science that can let us know when someone actually is impaired and shouldn't be driving versus when someone is just medicated and living their day-to-day life. Like there's a difference.
Yeah, and even still, like trying to remove that stigma, even with, was it now 34 states that are recreational in the US that have been approved to sell cannabis. to the public, I think it's still there because even when I was working in Florida and people knowing that I'm coming from the cannabis industry, I would still have jokes cracked at me, and it's like I'm a supercritical extraction scientist. I know what I'm talking about. Even if I was working with this plant that produces a molecule that inebriates people, it doesn't make me any different. Like I still use it, and I can still explain these terms that you can understand, but yet you're still like making a joke that what I do outside of work is going to affect me professionally or even my cognitive performance, and that's not always the case.
Oh, yeah, the stigma is still so, so real. I mean, just what you're talking about, but also, like, I think that's why it's important for people like us to be very outspoken in whether it's, like, on the internet or whether it's, at political advocacy events, showing that people who are scientists and doctors and lawyers and whatever it is are also daily cannabis consumers or just cannabis consumers in general. Even when I talk in front of like these house committees, when I'm talking about these bills, I always say that I'm a daily cannabis consumer because I always want them to know that, like, I'm giving this very science backed, like, very long testimony, and I'm using a lot of big words in it. But also, I was high when I wrote this, and you can be very smart and very high, and that's okay.
Yeah, yep. And there's nothing wrong with that. Just like with
No.
anyone else that, I mean, just like with, famous writers that are drunk while they're writing their best pieces. I mean, still under the influence of something, right? Or just with like the majority of the population having to drink caffeine to function in the morning and then throughout the rest of the day, same thing. So I think
A lot of
it's
scientists have traditionally used psychedelics to think of new ideas or to think of problems to solutions. That doesn't mean that they're a bad idea. That means they're probably a really good idea.
yeah. And so segue. Have you ever done any research into functional mushrooms, specifically neurotropics?
I have not. I used to do some research on mushrooms like chaga, reishi, lion's mane, but really it was just about quantifying active compounds. I never published any, it was no like novel research. I should put this in context. I had this large medicinal plant extract library that was part of what I did my PhD on, is like the traditional
Mhm.
and contemporary uses of these medicinal plants. So I had a few medicinal fungi in there as well, but I never published any scientific literature on them specifically because there was never a like specific active reason why I was studying them. They were just used in a screening effort for new activity.
I see. And on your podcast, are you speaking with other individuals who are working on other molecules coming from plants?
Yeah, so the podcast is called Bioactive. And the reason I called it Bioactive is I really wanted it to be about cannabis, but other natural products as well, because in my opinion, cannabis is definitely my favorite medicinal plant. It's the one I use the most. But I think if we really want to learn about how much nature has to offer and how cool our bodies are, we kind of have to talk about a variety of different plants and fungi and even other things that we might maybe it's pharmaceuticals, maybe it's toxins, other things that have activity on our body. So I mostly talk to other researchers, but I'm also talking to patients. I'm also just talking to people kind of ancillary in the industry, extractors, whatever it is, just to kind of learn about what they do, whether it's with any sort of medicine. I'm just kind of interested in talking to people about whether they're an expert from professional reasons or personal reasons. I don't really care.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think we're on similar paths. I definitely want to start like understanding how these psychoactive compounds, specifically on the psychedelic side, are being used in therapy treatments and actually am going to be releasing an episode next week that covers a ketamine-based assisted therapy treatment
Cool.
program. So it's yeah, there's so many different avenues that we can go down and explore, and there's just a lot of cool people that are doing incredible work in our country. And I think, just with us being the the country that promotes the most pharmaceuticals on advertisements in the world. No other country does this more than we do. It's all there. Like we need to be able to talk about this and openly criticize because, like I explained this to my friends, I'm like even with science, like it's all falsifiable at the end of the day. A new theory could be proved, and all the shit that we thought was correct is not.
Yeah, like SSRIs. Like we have research that they are very likely not working how that we thought they were for the last, 20 years, which is it is about it's concerning to me that people just aren't curious about what they're putting in their body. I understand if people don't care about everything, like every natural product and
Yeah.
every supplement and every drug, like that's a lot to care about. But like if I was on a if I was on any drug, any supplement, I would at the very least Google what it's doing in my body. I mean, this is our body. Like this is everything. If we dysregulate something, it could be very difficult to become regulated again. And that could have serious implications on our quality of life. And I think like a good example of this is Ozempic and how many people are just kind of blindly taking Ozempic. And I'm on TikTok because I create TikToks and I'm seeing all these young people taking Ozempic like completely blindly because they think it's going to like help them lose weight in the long run. And it's like, so that here's a drug that's clearly working on your metabolism, which is implicated in like everything in your body. And you're just going to take it and hope that nothing bad happens ever. Like I feel like we should just at least give people the tools to learn about what's happening. And if they choose not to, watch those tools or listen to those tools, then they don't have to. But at the very least, if we can provide information on how these things are working in the body and make it accessible and make it entertaining, I think that's the best thing we can do to just like help people think a little bit more about what they're putting in their body.
Yeah, and to piggyback off of that, like growing up in Vegas and being around all these fitness influencers and just overall like show models, the people that I went to school with would just jump into taking anabolic steroids without actually doing significant research into it. And it's just like, do you know what the implications are for long term health on this? No, you're just thinking about short term gains. Yeah, you're going to be jacked. Yeah, you're going to be lean. Yeah, you're going to look a certain way. You're going to feel incredible. But what happens when you remove those compounds that you've been taking on a monthly basis? Well, all of your hormones are going to be out of whack. All of the calories that you were just intaking and burning off because of this influence of the compound, guess what? All the calories are going to be stored in your fat cells now. Our testosterone levels, excuse me, were so high, and now they're about to drop, and your estrogen levels are going to skyrocket. And just yeah, just like you're saying, just having these educational pieces that people can gravitate towards and be like, oh shit, maybe I should think about what I'm putting into my body and really consider if this is going to benefit me in the long term.
Right. And it starts with drugs and it ends with food. And food is medicine, right? And there's just like, there's so much to the conversation once you start to really care and think of your body as this like, this beautiful ecosystem that, we're in control of. And of course, there's accessibility issues with quality food and medicine. But I think at the very least, one of the reasons why I'm such a proponent of even making your own tincture, making your own brownies, making your own anything. Like, I think it's important to be involved in your medicine in some way and to actively take time into healing yourselves. I think a lot of this is just my opinion, but a lot of what makes Americans so unhealthy specifically is, we're always rushing around. And we do that with our medicine too. We always want things to be in a pill form, completely accessible, integrated into our day so they don't take a minute of our time that they don't have to. And it's like, so why are we deciding not to take a minute of our time to heal our bodies? Why are we skipping over that? Because even if you have to make a tea, for instance, you're making a nice
Mhm.
chamomile tea before bed, you still have to take the time to put that tea into a teapot, pour hot water over it, boil that water, and you're thinking about the tea during that time and how, that's you're looking forward to it. It's beneficial. It's a good thing. I think if we can do that with our medicine a little more and like add the conscious aspect and intention of healing, there's profound benefits to thinking about medicine in that way versus everything you'd ever need just being in a capsule ready for you to take, because at that point we're not thinking about why is the system even dysregulated to begin with, is there anything else I can change. Instead we're just always thinking like problem solution, instead of the concept of preventable medicine or preventative medicine is like, how do we make sure this problem doesn't start to begin with? What can we do in our lives to increase the amount of antioxidants and anti-inflammatory compounds? And like, how can we protect ourselves instead of just kind of going through this constant battle of, disease and getting better and disease and drugs and disease and drugs? How do we make it more sustainable?
Yeah, I think that, and just to piggyback off of that, I was pre-med as well, and I was in the emergency room for 2 years, scribing for doctors and going into an orthopedic clinic and working there, and just seeing how broken our care system really is. How people are consuming a lot of their information off of like just television shows and trying to get like help through that, but that's not enough. Like you need to be able to actually learn what works best for your body, and then just also figure out what's making you sick. Like, what is it in your lifestyle that you continue to do and push aside and just say, oh no, it's fine. I mean, the biggest thing that I see, especially in America, are is just sugar, like soda. Soda is like the number one thing that's promoting diabetes in America. And like, I think I was reading like a recent paper of saying that a majority of Americans are, it's like a 60% are obese, and it's just like, how the fuck did we get here? And it's really starting with nutrition. It's really starting with diet. Starting with that lifestyle overall.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. And it would be amazing if we also had, community and federal support in trying to make, healthier options more affordable. And also maybe like healthcare systems, for instance, providing cannabis as part of health care, right? Like, why are we expected to pay for our own cannabis if we have hundreds of publications saying that it has medicinal benefits and we have two FDA approved drugs from cannabis? But for some reason our healthcare system doesn't pay for cannabis, for medical patients specifically. That shouldn't always be on the patient. Our system is often kind of set up in that same disease drug pathway. So I'm not saying this is like anyone individual's fault. I'm just like, just the way we think about healthcare and medicine in America is sometimes just a little disheartening and a little cyclical and causing the issues. And maybe that's on purpose, maybe it's not. But just facilitating any sort of component of intention into your medicine, your food, your healing, I believe is greatly beneficial, in the long run.
So moving into the next question, how do you think taking cannabis from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3 is going to go? That's like
I feel like I'm
a,
not the best person to answer this, but I feel like it's going to be a disaster. Cannabis definitely should just be descheduled, if anything. I think Schedule 3 is, we were just talking right before this we started recording, but here in New Hampshire, they're proposing a franchise model or a state run model for dispensaries, which I think is a terrible idea. And if Schedule 3 goes through, I think that entire plan will just be essentially abolished. I'm not sure what's going to happen to the rest of the legal infrastructure, but um, I just wish more like cannabis industry professionals were involved in the making of any of these rules and regulations, whether it's state or federal. And I think we're up for some uphill battles if we see some rescheduling happening. But I also realize for so many people, rescheduling can be a great thing. So I don't know. That's all I got to say on that subject.
For sure, yeah, because I've just been reading a ton of different articles, and obviously it's all speculative. Because at the end of the day, like you're saying, when we were talking about this before starting, um, it's really up to the lawmakers and what they're willing to sign into effect. How's it
Yeah.
going to benefit them ultimately, and at the state level or federal level? Um, now it's definitely an exciting time, but also just being on the sidelines and thinking, oh shit, what's gonna happen next? Like all this work pushing forward,
Well,
and
it's
then does
also
it get
just like
erased?
just in legal fees for every cannabis company to like, hire their lawyers and figure out what this means. And it's just going to cost so much money to our industry that's already like essentially railed from every single side with every single tax that could potentially exist times 10. So just
Mm.
thinking about from a monetary standpoint, it's very daunting for our industry.
So, in the next 5 years, what do you think our landscape looks like with cannabis?
For the whole industry,
Hmm.
you know, I tend to be chronically optimistic with this question. But with this whole Schedule 3 thing, I really don't know what that's going to look like. Um, and I don't actually even know what I want it to look like because the more that politicians get involved, the more I'm just kind of off put by what they're doing. I think the illicit market will still be thriving forever
Hmm.
because of what's currently happening on these at the state and federal landscape. So that's all I'll
Yeah.
say for sure is that we're always gonna have illicit market weed, and I will always support the illicit market.
And hopefully we get to a point, like you're saying, that we can have home grow so that we don't have to get to a dispensary that's ran by state level that is giving you mid-level bud or products, and you can just do it all yourself at home. That I think that would be the most beneficial pathway to go to and not be criminalized for it.
Yeah, and that would be the most I don't know the word. It would be the most obvious thing to do if we were actually trying to help people, but that is
Hmm.
not the goal. Which is so clear. If we were just trying to help people and provide quality medicine for an affordable price, we would have home grow across this entire country, and a lot of people would be healed or have independent medicine that they were in charge of and they could cultivate to their own needs. But it's not about medicine, it's not about healing, it's not what's best for the people, it's about money, it's about control. And that's currently what we're dealing with of, who gets the most money and who gets the most control.
Yeah, just
Not to
objective
sound too
reality
negative,
settling
but
in.
yeah.
Yeah, no, it's just it has to be talked about. You can't just go in and think every day that this is it unravels some way, whether it be good or bad. Like there's going to be a pathway that people figure out afterwards, and they'll move forward and continue doing the good work that they're doing regardless. Um, so
Yeah. I
with
mean,
some.
definitely. And I think what bothers me is about the control thing is like I'm a natural product chemist. I have so many medicinal plants I grow at my house. a lot of them can kill you in the wrong dose, like, quite easily, right? Like, you have the castor plant, produces ricin, you have Atropa belladonna, produces atropine, you have digitalis, digoxin, right? You have all of these plants that can produce these molecules that could easily kill someone. But I can grow them all in my yard. I can grow them all. Like, anybody can stop by and pick a flower and whatever, right? But with this one medicinal plant, cannabis, that has never killed anyone on its own, cannabis has never killed anyone. It has so many different medicinal benefits. We know about the endocannabinoid system and how this system can heal so many different conditions, but they want us to have a limit to how many plants we can grow of that, and to have them locked in a fence, and to have our license to cultivate pasted outside, and all of these different things, or just completely outlawed altogether. To me, like, that's so clearly not about the actual potential harms here. It's really just about us being able to operate outside of a system and have no need to spend the money on that medicine, whether it's replacing pharmaceuticals or whether it's purchasing cannabis at a dispensary. Now we don't need to do that. Now we can be in charge of our own medicine. We can have our community work together and healing each other, extracting this medicine, growing this medicine, gifting this medicine. And that's what scares people the most. And to me, that's like so disheartening because it's so obvious.
Yeah, and I think the country's built on this premise that we should be free to do exactly what you're saying, to be able to cultivate your own garden of plant medicine that you can use for healing or any other ailments that you may be suffering by, or just like you're saying, create a community where you can be the go-to person to help them get over that hump of, okay, this is something that you should look into and research more. Here's how to grow it. Here's how to extract it. Here's how to consume it or apply it. Um, Definitely need more people to step up and take action. I think a lot more people are being inspired by educators such as ourselves that can look into doing their own practice and wanting to jump into a field, not just cannabis, be it psychedelics, be it supplements, be it nutrition, and promote what they have gone through specifically. So, can you tell me why cannabis has helped your life so much?
Yeah, why it's helped my life. My answer might be a bit different. I don't have like a I don't have well, I have two reasons. Okay. Um First of all, it makes me a very, very nice person. And I'm not saying that I am not a nice person when I'm not using cannabis, but sometimes I'm definitely not. And
Mm,
growing up, myself and my two older brothers, we were always allowed to use cannabis because my mom
mhm,
saw how nice we were to each other and to her when we were using
mhm.
cannabis. And, when you're a teenager, like, there's a large amount of dysregulation happening in your body. Like, you're changing a lot, right? And it really
Yeah,
helped us, be kind and be present. And it had a very just positive impact. It also kept us away from using other drugs. Like, we were happy using cannabis. We never sought out anything else. And my mom saw that like level of harm reduction both from like a social aspect and from an other substances aspect. And to this day, like, I still use it mainly to enjoy life to the fullest. I am more creative, I am happier, I am more social, I have less anxiety, I always have fun, I'm energetic, and a lot of this is because of cannabis and really what it does for my brain. It really brings me into this happy, comfortable place, and I have no reason to not be here. Like, it has not impacted my life to use cannabis. It has only added to my life, especially when I've learned to
mm,
respect the medicine. And that's why I continue to
right.
use it every day. Additionally, I have had
Mm,
seizures in my life. When I was younger, growing up and into high school, I've had multiple seizures. And I never had, like, the actual relationship of, like, cannabis helps prevent my seizures, but since I
Mhm.
started using cannabis daily, I haven't had a seizure. So to me, there's obviously something happening there, and there's obviously the data that CBD and other cannabinoids can help with seizure conditions. So I believe the way it kind of itches my brain and makes me feel at peace is related to that seizure disorder as well. I just don't know exactly what that mechanism is at this point, but my brain just reacts so positively to it. And I am someone who has always listened to my body. And I can tell that, my body is meant to consume cannabis. It is super additive to my life and it's absolutely medicinal.
Ah, yeah, I love hearing stories like that. It's definitely a game changer for people that are getting exposed to it at the first time to start listening to stories like this because it's like for the longest time, you know, with the stigma being carried, all these baby boomers like getting into it and starting to try just edibles at the beginning. That's what I saw at the ortho clinic to deal with pain, and it's just like yeah, why not try it? It's available. It's like no one's gonna give a fuck that you're trying it, but at the same time, you should definitely do your research so you don't end up in the ER for over medicating. So I'm playing devil's advocate here.
No, that's
What are
good.
the
That's good. With the
what are the
with the
things
older
to
population.
look? Yeah, yeah. What are the things to look for newcomers? Like, what do you suggest that they start out with?
Yeah, whenever I'm kind of talking to people about using it for the first time, one, I like to be there. Like, I will obviously talk to other people about it, but I think having a mentor of sorts in your community. So I'm a mentor for a lot of people. I'm like people's, bridge into this world. And having a mentor and letting them know what you want out of that experience and making sure you trust that mentor, I think is the most important thing. So for instance, I think my friend was about 55 years old and she was interested in trying cannabis for the first time, but she's like, I don't want to feel too high. I don't want to feel overwhelmed. I don't want to feel anxious, blah, blah, blah. So I like rolled her up a joint, but it was probably 90% hemp and 10% THC type 1 weed, right? So all I was trying to do from that experience is to essentially give her a tiny bit, just enough so that she understands what her brain might feel like and so that she can understand if she wants that experience or not, and if she wants more of that experience or not. And I like to kind of walk people through in like multiple times hanging out of like increasing the dose, changing consumption method, just trying out these different things for people to try. But in general, always low and slow. Always low and slow. If you're taking an edible, take as little as you think, like you're essentially microdosing. So I recommend people start with like 2.5 milligrams. So you cut a 5
Mhm.
milligram gummy in half. Try that, take it on a full stomach, and then like wait out the whole night. Don't take more, no matter how you're feeling. Just don't take more. Record in like a notebook what product you tried, what dose, and how it made you feel. A different day, if you want a different dose, try it again, do the same thing, don't take any more, write down how it makes you feel, etc. And I think that's a good way to kind of titrate your dose to start to feel what your level of feeling comfortable versus feeling overwhelmed versus a positive feeling versus a negative feeling, and really just starting to outline that experience, whether your body greatly prefers edibles, whether you find dosing with vapes easier, whether you prefer the feeling of smoking, just really like taking it easy all the time when you're first starting and keeping track of what you're doing. And then you'll be able to kind of build this profile of, okay, I hated the feeling of smoking. I loved the feeling of edibles. 10 milligrams was too much. 2 milligrams was not enough. 5 milligrams is perfect. You can start to really outline that and almost guarantee that you're not going to have a negative experience. With some people who are like really against weed, like very against weed, but maybe they have chronic pain or something, I think
Mhm.
topicals can be a great way just to be like, I can tell you 1 billion% you're not going to feel high. You're not going to feel anything in your brain, but your knee will likely feel better after using this product. So once they say, oh my God, that actually worked, then all of a sudden they start to understand that cannabis actually works and that it is a very bioactive substance and that, the other consumption methods can cause different effects, but you can still make it not scary. It's really just the point of when people get either too confident in cannabis or in psychedelics and maybe stop respecting the medicine, where I think a lot of the negative things happen.
The heroic dose, as we call it.
It's and if you
um,
like if that's your intention, like good for you, but for new users, like don't go for the heroic dose. You don't need to do that.
no, no, stay far away from that. So those are a lot of really good advice there for people that are listening. Definitely go low and slow. I always recommend that as well. With basically anything, it's always easier to start out small and then make baby steps upward. Uh, Closing questions. I like to do this with guests. Favorite podcast to listen to?
So this is so funny because I have a podcast and it's like a science podcast, but I don't listen to a lot of podcasts except
Mm-hmm.
crime ones. I love Crime Junkie. I love listening about like murder stories. And that's my favorite podcast and the only one I listen to. But I do love audiobooks. That's kind of my jam.
Okay. What kind of audiobooks?
Well, right now I'm listening to Julia Fox's book. I should actually preface all of this with saying I don't consume a lot of science media. And I think that's because it's so ingrained in my day to day. Like all I'm
Mm-hmm.
doing for 8 hours, 10 hours a day is science stuff. So I'm like pretty adamant about exercising my brain kind of in different ways. So whether that's creating
Mm-hmm.
art or whether it's, physically building something or, whatever I'm doing around, I really like to step away from science and give the other parts of my brain some like time to train up. So I really like World War II books in general. And that's just because I'm like fascinated with that era. My favorite World War II book is
Mm-hmm.
Rena's Promise. It will make you cry. It's a great book, though. And then I also just read the book In the Dream House. That book was really good, too. But as far as audiobooks, I kind of just listen to what I would consider like trashy books. It's just like entertaining and not necessarily educational.
You have to find a way to decompress from everything that you're doing. So, no, that makes a lot of sense.
Right. And like it you don't want to have to be like, paying attention 24/7 and being like, "Oh, what did they
Yeah,
say about the immune system?" Like I don't like if I'm
yeah.
washing dishes, I just want to like listen to Julia Fox talk about blowing lines of coke off of somebody's butt. Like that's just fun. Like that's my goal.
Oh, that's great. What was I gonna say? What is your favorite strain of cannabis to smoke?
My favorite strain ever is Jack Hare, and he's also, a just advocate goal like person I've always looked up to in cannabis. But in
Mhm,
general, the reason I love Jackson Hayes's so much is
mhm,
the terpinolene dominant strains just itch my brain. And I think anybody who like I have a very ADHD brain, but I'm not diagnosed with ADHD. I just like have trouble paying attention to things a lot.
mhm.
And I genuinely think people who have similar brains should try terpinolene dominant strains, just try Ghost Train Haze, try Jack Herrera, try Durban Poison. And I think they might work for you too. But those are my favorite for sure.
I love Durban Poison. The one strain that and I don't know if it exists anymore just because everything's been so hybridized. When I first started smoking, when I was 15, White Widow was available in Las Vegas, like gray
Oh yeah.
market. Uh, that was the only strain where I smoked it and I had legitimate replays of all my friends like in the room together. We were all talking about something, and I shit you not, like everything that we just said would replay 10 seconds later.
What?
Like it was fucking insane. Like it was a mild psychedelic experience, and we smoked out of an apple of all things. And I just remember that the strain hit me that hard that I've never been able to recreate that experience. But White Widow was definitely it.
Wow. That is so sick. I wonder what that was.
I have
Have you
no fucking
smoked
idea.
White Widow since then?
I've been I've been chasing the dragon ever since. Like I haven't been able
Oh
to
my god.
find oh my middle straight.
Wow, that's actually insane. I don't know how I would, like, react to experiencing that. I think I would I don't know. Like, what is happening in the brain to make that happen? That's such an interesting
I,
experience.
yeah, like if for instance, if I was like to wave my hand, like the visual like perception of it would have been like a replay of like me waving my hand, and then it'd be like a slower down version, and then it would like snap back into reality of what was happening, and then it would continue again with whatever we were doing in my room. And I just vividly remember that even to this day of like me sitting there with all my boys, and I'm telling them this experience of what's happening, and they're like, "What the fuck, man? Like, I'm not having that right now." I'm like, "Yeah, I don't know if you want to right now."
I was just gonna ask if just you was experiencing this or if this was like a group semi trip on weed, but that's just you. That's crazy.
Yeah, and with like cannabis, it's weird because I can build up a tolerance, and over time, like it'll hit me the same, but I can take a break for maybe 2 days, and it's like I could take one hit, and it's like the first time that I ever smoked. Like my body's so
Whoa.
sensitive to pounds that I need like the smallest dose possible, and I'll still experience it just like the first time that I've taken it.
Wow. That's kind of amazing. So tolerance breaks are pretty valuable to you, I guess. You get to
Yeah.
start like just start from scratch. That's amazing.
Yeah, and people were like always like mad about it because like you basically can survive on an ounce for 3 to 4 months. I'm like, yeah, because I don't have to smoke that much.
Hey, yeah, I mean, keep your tolerance low if you can. That's great.
The last question that I want to ask, and this one is the most important: what advice would you give to someone who wants to get into a STEM career?
Ooh, to get into a STEM career, I think one, be curious. I think that's the best thing that you could do is just to don't just take everything for what somebody tells you or what you think is obvious because answers are almost never obvious. So ask questions, be curious. If you go to talks, talk to other researchers and ask them curious questions and just keep digging deeper. And also, pursue what you're passionate about. I've met a lot of scientists in graduate school or in other fields who became a scientist or a PhD researcher to get rich. And
Mm,
I don't know any of them who are actually happy now because they didn't pursue what they wanted to. And that didn't make them good at their job. I mean, you're only going to be good at your job if you care about it and you're curious and you're really like, you just feel drawn to it. So there's so many fields of STEM that you can do whatever you want. You can research anything you want, but whatever you do, make sure you're very passionate about it because passionate researchers definitely make the best researchers. Also, talk to your community, talk to non-scientists because oftentimes a lot of obvious things will get lost somewhere in between before it reaches scientists. And I think the general public, people's lived experience, people's personal experience has a lot of validity. And I think we could learn a lot by just listening to what people have already experienced and what they already know, and just making sure
Mhm.
that we give them a space in professional research and professional spaces. I'll reiterate what I said earlier as far as training your brain to think differently. If you want to
Mhm.
go into a career with STEM, of course, it's important to put in the work and read the articles and shadow the right people and do all that stuff. But, don't only do the stuff that is within a linear track of that. You want to make sure you're doing other stuff that gets you outside and gets your brain thinking in different ways, or you're talking to people that help your brain think in different ways. Because the coolest part about being a scientist is being able to think on a nonlinear path. And that does take some training to get your brain to think outside the box and to think of novel solutions for these really complex problems.
Mhm.
If that's doing psychedelics, that's doing psychedelics. And I would
Right.
recommend that too if you're open to it. But I'm not saying everyone has to do that. But I will say it helps a lot of people. And then I I guess I would lastly say, if you want if you want to enter a STEM career, don't let the system make you boring. Like, the system wants you to fit into a perfect little box and wants to guide you in a very specific career direction, but you don't have to. You definitely should listen to what is calling you, what people are calling you, who's happiest that you meet. And, always be yourself, always be creative, and you will find the right people. You'll gravitate towards each other and find the people that boost you up instead of knock you down. But STEM is a really, really, really cool field. And there's so much opportunity, as you were saying earlier. And it's really just wide open, especially for people who are passionate and driven. So find your passion and make some change.
Well said. Love that. I love that you're able to do what you do currently, still able to use cannabis and benefit your life professionally and on a personal level. So I think this you're continuing to inspire a lot of people. So thank you so much for joining me on today's episode, and I hope to have you come back for a future episode.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. And I'm always happy to come back on.
Awesome. Thank you, Riley. Have a good day.
Thanks. You too.